We often think about history in, well, neat little boxes, don't we?
Yeah.
Separate events, different people.
Right. Compartmentalized.
But what if those walls are, much thinner than we think? What if intelligence operations, organized crime, things that seem completely unconnected
Are actually linked. Part of a bigger picture.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you've sent us a really fascinating bunch of source materials.
Mm-hmm.
And our job, like always, is to wade through it, pull out the key stuff, and show you how these seemingly separate pieces, well, fit together, without getting too lost in the weeds, hopefully.
And what really stands out here, I think, is just the sheer scale of these hidden ties. We're talking about the very birth of U.S. intelligence.
Yeah.
The rise of global organized crime and how they've kind of danced around each other for decades.
Reaching right into the highest levels of power, shaping big historical moments.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Building U.S. intelligence. It wasn't just like flicking a switch, was it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
There was a real effort needed to build support publicly and within the government itself.
And that's where the British come in, the BSC.
That's right, the British Security Coordination.
Yeah.
Essentially a covert British intelligence group working in the U.S. during World War II.
Okay.
They really understood how important public opinion was, and they actively worked the media to push the idea of a strong U.S. intelligence agency.
And the sources point to the New York Herald Tribune as a key outlet.
Yeah, that seems to have been one of their preferred channels. They used it to plant articles, basically, build that consensus.
And this figure, George Fielding Eliot, he was central, a British sympathizer.
He was involved in a BSC front group, Fight for Freedom, and he became sort of their go-to writer for these pieces.
What kind of stuff was he writing?
Well, he often wrote about the supposed dangers, the lack of coordination between the FBI, Naval Intelligence, ONI, and Military Intelligence, G2.
Pushing the idea of a threat, fifth columnists and all that.
Exactly. Highlighting risks, making the case for a more centralized system.
And this wasn't just going unnoticed. It reached FDR.
It did. The sources mention an incident, May 1941. Vincent Astor, friend of Roosevelt, an intelligence coordinator himself.
Right.
He sent FDR a clipping from the Herald Tribune by Eliot. And that specific article argued for a single coordinator for the FBI, ONI, and G2.
Wow. Okay, so the propaganda worked in a sense. It helped legitimize intelligence services.
Yes, but here's the twist, right?
Yeah.
The focus on secrecy, covert ops, dealing with external threats.
Yeah.
That inadvertently created this space, this kind of shadow world where criminal networks could later operate more easily.
Because of the secrecy needed, plausible deniability and all that.
Precisely. Once you establish those methods, that need for things to happen off the books, well, others can use that environment too, not just governments.
Okay, fast forward. End of World War II, and things get even murkier. This alliance between intelligence and organized crime starts to really take shape.
It really does. Take Lucky Luciano. Naval intelligence was reportedly pushing hard to get him released from prison.
Wait, the guy who prosecuted him, Thomas Dewey?
Yeah, Dewey. In 1946, he commuted Luciano's sentence. The deal was Luciano gets deported to Italy.
And he wasn't the only one kicked out.
No, not by a long shot. Estimates are maybe 100 other gangsters were deported around that time, too.
So sending Luciano to Italy, that didn't exactly neutralize him, did it?
Quite the opposite, according to these sources. It marks the real start of this transnational organized crime network, with links back to U.S. intelligence.
So he could run things from Italy and expand in Europe.
Exactly. And think about who else was deported with him. Frank Coppola.
Big mafia guy from Detroit, connected to Jimmy Hoffa.
Coppola mentored Hoffa, the Teamsters boss, and Coppola himself had alleged ties to American intelligence.
There are even claims about him being involved in that May Day massacre in Sicily, financed by William Donovan, the old OSS chief.
That's what some sources suggest, yeah. That's a startling connection, if true. Donovan, head of the OSS, precursor to the CIA.
And the Hoffa link becomes really important later, right, with the CIA.
By the 60s, yeah. Hoffa and the Teamsters were allegedly working with the CIA, trying to get rid of Castro.
Because Castro had shut down the mafia's casinos in Cuba.
Right. It just shows these incredibly strange bedfellows, these murky alliances.
Which brings up a question. Why did investigations into the mob in the U.S. seem to slow down around then?
That's a key point in the sources. It wasn't just, lack of resources. There are hints, suggestions of blackmail.
Blackmail. Against who?
Potentially even J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director. The idea being that maybe Hoover or others were compromised, which hindered investigations.
And if U.S. organized crime isn't being investigated fully,
Then other things get obscured too,
Mhm.
like the role of the Kuomintang, the KMT, the Chinese nationalists in the drug trade.
because there were existing links between the U.S. mob and Asian drug networks.
Yeah, going way back. So by not looking too closely at the American side, the KMT's massive drug operation kind of flew under the radar for a while.
Where were they operating? The Golden Triangle.
Deeply involved there, yeah. Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, shipping opium harvests to Thailand.
And their main buyer?
General Faisian, head of the Thai police, and crucially, a CIA client.
So the CIA knew about this drug connection.
Well, initially, the CIA support for Faye and the KMT was about strategy, giving the KMT forces a base after they lost mainland China.
But it quickly turned into something else, fueling the drug trade.
It became a massive catalyst for it, yeah. The CIA support helped the KMT stay in Burma, now Myanmar, until '61.
And even after they left Burma.
They already massively ramped up opium production in Shan State in Myanmar. It's a classic case of unintended consequences, or maybe conveniently ignored ones.
Okay, let's follow the money. Connections to banking, finance. Because these operations, intelligence, crime, they need ways to move cash, right?
Always. Money needs laundering, needs to be hidden, and the sources bring up the Bronfman family.
E-grams, prohibition bootlegging.
Exactly. They exploited loopholes in Canada and the U.S., built a huge operation. Sam Bronfman built this massive network.
And his New York Times obituary mentioned something else. Arms for Israel.
Yeah, after WWII apparently helped finance a secret arms purchase for Israel. So, connections beyond just liquor, even early on.
Then there are figures like Sylvain Ferdman, International Credit Bank, ICB.
Right. Ferdman helped set up ICB. And he had links to skimming rackets, stealing small amounts off the top.
And Meyer Lansky's allies were involved with ICB.
Seems so. Ed Levinson, who ran a Vegas casino for the mob, he was on the ICB board, allies of Lansky, the big mob financier.
Lansky himself, he moved his money around too.
Yeah, after some issues with Chase Manhattan, he apparently shifted business to a bank in Geneva, run by Tiber Rosenbaum.
And Rosenbaum was connected to the Israel Corporation with the Rothschilds.
Co-organized with the Rothschilds. And that corporation later got tangled up in a big financial scandal.
It's like a spider web. Bruce Rappaport, another banker,
Yeah.
ties to Russian organized crime. Mogilevich.
Through Robert Maxwell, the media guy, and Edmund Safra, another banker. Rappaport also had served in the Israeli Defense Forces, adds another layer. And you mentioned the Kulakundis and Mavrolian families, shipping families.
Yeah, the sources mention them, and later their names pop up again in connection with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Wow. Shows how these networks can persist, or at least the names recur over generations.
We also see Louis Bloomfield mentioned, a lawyer, ties to the Bronfmans.
And to some mysterious entity in Rome connected to U.S., Italian, French, Israeli intelligence, and organized crime. It's incredibly tangled.
And Roy Cohn keeps coming up, a major power player, using blackmail, maybe like Hoover.
And that's the allegation. And involvement in a sexual blackmail operation linked to Louis Rosenstiel, the liquor baron.
Tied to the anti-communist hunts and the Lavender Scare.
Apparently so. Using personal secrets for political leverage. That seems to have been his forte.
His own legal troubles, United Dye, Fifth Avenue coach lines. He always seemed to land on his feet.
He was a master navigator of the system, it seems. Knew how to use connections.
Then there's Arno Newman, or Nejman, his family bank in Belgium, Jeffries Bank.
Linked later to illegal arms deals involving Israeli intelligence around the time of Iran-Contra.
And his partner, David Benally, or Azali, Mossad links, weapons smuggling through Belgium.
That's what the sources suggest. It paints this picture of Belgium being a hub for some of these covert arms flows.
So this pattern keeps emerging. Intelligence, crime, finance, all interwoven. Let's look at the political and business networks that kind of grease the wheels for all this.
Okay, like the Profumo affair in Britain back in the early 60s.
Right, the sex scandal involving the government minister.
Well, figures allegedly involved included Thomas Corbally, David Bruce, who was the U.S. ambassador then, and William Mellon Hitchcock. It suggests even personal scandals could have these deeper intelligence connections.
And Robert Keith Gray. He sounds like a real nexus point. Lobbyist, PR guy.
A major one. His network, according to the sources, was vast. Korean CIA, U.S. CIA, Adnan Khashoggi.
The arms deal.
Yep. Robert Maxwell, the Teamsters, BCCI Bank.
Oh, yeah.
Gray seemed connected to almost everyone.
And his name pops up everywhere. Koreagate, Watergate.
The page boy scandal in the 80s, Iran-Contra. He was clearly a very powerful behind-the-scenes operator.
He helped set up the Georgetown Club in D.C. with Tongson Park and Chanel.
Yeah, explicitly designed as a place for influential people from different sectors to meet and, well, connect. Make deals, perhaps.
Then there's General Graves B. Erskine, Operation Paper. This was a CIA thing.
Involved Paul Helliwell, Sea Supply Corporation, supporting KMT fighters in Burma and Thailand.
But it also eventually fueled the drug trade there.
That's the disturbing implication, yes. Another example of operations having unintended or maybe overlooked side effects.
And the allegations about Gray specializing in homosexual blackmail for the CIA, possibly taking over from Cohn.
That's a particularly dark allegation mentioned in the sources. And the link between Cohn, Gray, and Jeffrey Epstein through Khashoggi during Iran-Contra, that raises huge questions.
Yeah. We also see Edwin Wilson again, his CIA activities, his links to Ted Shackley.
He's a recurring figure in these shadowy operations. And Anna Chenault? Her involvement with Diplomat National Bank.
A conduit for the Korean CIA. And the Unification Church. And the journalist Jack Anderson had accounts there.
He shows how political influence, intelligence funding, and maybe even religious groups could intersect through these financial channels.
Tongson Park seems key here, too. Alleged influence over that bank.
Yeah, he seems to have been a major player. And Jack Anderson, again, getting complimentary shares in another bank, District of Columbia National Bank.
Linked to Bobby Baker, LBJ's guy, and Ed Levinson, the Lansky associate.
Yes, and Arthur Arundel, who had ties to Edward Lansdale.
The famous covert ops guy.
Right. And the China lobby KMT through Pepsi, he was involved with this bank too. It's like 6 degrees of separation, but with spies and mobsters.
Joseph Califano Jr., he was involved in Operation Mongoose, the anti-Castro stuff.
Yeah, worked with Lansdale and Ted Shackley, and collaborated with the young Alexander Haig back then. Shows how deep these networks went into actual government operations.
And that 1982 Pageboy scandal, the recanted testimony, feels like another potential cover-up.
It adds to the pattern of scandals being managed or contained somehow.
Okay, more on the financial side. The banks, the scandals, Walter Mischer Jr., Allied Bank shares.
Board members like Howard Terry and Gerald Smith. Smith had other banking interests tied to Herman Beebe.
Beebe, SNL fraud, mob connections.
That's him. And Jack T. Trotter, Mischer's associate at Allied, he had long ties to the Duncan family and their Bank of the Southwest.
Which the sources say was a CIA funding channel.
That's the suggestion. These regional banks often played these hidden but crucial roles.
And George H.W. Bush, he was a director at First International Bank shares, FIHB.
Yes. And Fayyab had strong Saudi ties and alleged links to BCCI. It definitely puts the connections very high up the chain.
Edwin Wilson again, potentially linked early on to Cordmeyer's division at the CIA, the one involving Norman Mailer, ZRM Major.
Suggests his involvement might go back even further, be even deeper than often thought.
What about Robert Vesco, the fugitive financier?
Huge scandal. The SEC investigation into him and his company, IOS, allegedly William Casey, future CIA director, interfered.
And Vesco's jet turning up in Costa Rica, linked to a company funneling aid to the Contras, and drug trafficking.
For Grifficos de Punta Arenas, yeah. Shows the overlap perfectly. Covert ops funding, drug money, shady finance.
And Casey had done legal work for Deacon Co., run by an ex-OSS guy close to the CIA.
Nicholas Deak, yeah. It reinforces those ties between intelligence and certain financial firms.
Which brings us squarely to BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. Infamous.
Deeply corrupt.
Yeah.
Even Richard Helms, former CIA director, basically called it a front.
It's black network, involved in arms, drugs, sex trafficking, murder for hire.
Just a horrifying list. A rogue bank operating globally, seemingly untouchable for a long time.
Oliver North's network, the Enterprise, used Swiss banks, Credit Suisse, dummy companies.
Absolutely. Complex structures to hide the money flow.
Yeah.
And Willard Zucker, his company CSF, managed those finances.
Zucker was also tied to iOS and Vesco.
Yes, linking these scandals together again.
General John Singlob, World Anti-Communist League, included some pretty unsavory characters, Nazi exiles, criminals.
Unfortunately, yes. Shows the kind of alliances that were sometimes formed in the name of anti-communism. And Bruce Rappaport's bank, Intermaritime. His lawyer, Pierre Schifferle. Rumored weapons deals there, too.
Adnan Khashoggi pops up again. Ties to mainland savings. Mario Renda. Daniel Przeborski in Costa Rica during Iran-Contra. Jeffrey's bank connection. Pure Selic, Mossad ties, Export-Import Bank linked to the BNL scandal.
It's a dizzying network. All these names, banks, countries interconnected through finance, arms deals, covert ops.
Rappaport's associate, Alfred Hartman, he was also high up at BNL, suggesting a BNL-BCCI link.
It strongly suggests a connection, yeah. And Space Research Corporation, owned partly by Bronfman interests, partly by Arthur D. Little, gets involved in Iran-Contra.
Iran-Contra itself. North's activities, concerns about Tom Klein's and the Enterprise, first Western airline used for arms.
Clear examples of the network in action. And Richard Brennicke's claims about Mena, Arkansas, flying guns out, cocaine back, distributed to New York mob.
Just explosive allegations.
Very. And even Harkin Energy, linked to the Bush family. Deals with Stevens Inc., bringing in people tied to BCCI. Shows how mainstream business could brush up against this stuff.
UBS, Union Bank of Switzerland, also linked to BCCI through BCP Bank and Hartman.
It just reinforces how deeply embedded these connections were within the legitimate global financial system.
Okay, let's talk Robert Maxwell and this PROMIS software. Maxwell, the media tycoon, huge connections in Eastern Europe, the USSR, including Mogilevich.
Yes, extensive ties. And he allegedly helped Mogilevich-linked companies get into the U.S. financial system using Israeli passports.
And PROMIS, originally case-tracking software, but bugged, misused by U.S. and Israeli intelligence.
That's the core allegation. Very serious. Sandia Labs apparently warned the FBI about Maxwell's company, information on demand potentially being a Mossad front.
And Oliver North might have used PROMIS for, what, a list of American dissidents? For continuity of government.
That's the disturbing claim, yes. Part of planning for emergencies, but potentially targeting citizens.
And Jackson Stevens' company, Systematics, marketed a CIA version of PROMIS, represented by the Rose Law Firm.
More connections, linking powerful financial players, law firms, and intelligence operations around this controversial software.
Back to Iran-Contra arms deals, LT Ransom trying to sell C-130s to Libya, planes end up with a law firm tied to Evergreen Aviation.
Ford and Brajos, yeah. And Evergreen has long been linked to the CIA. Shows the convoluted paths these arms could take.
Whistleblower Gary Idle claims about TNG Aviation working for Southern Air, Evergreen, disguised as Bechtel contracts.
Adds another layer of how these operations were allegedly hidden within legitimate business activities.
Nordex, trading company co-founded by Mark Rich, Russian oil, ISO Lenslinger, Swiss lawyer, connections to spies East and West, client of Nordex.
Just more evidence of this nexus where business, espionage, and potentially illicit finance meet.
E-Systems becomes Raytheon, defense contractor, linked to AirAsia, a known CIA front.
Reinforces that pattern of intelligence using commercial entities. And Khashoggi, he's just everywhere at these arms deals.
The Christic Institute lawsuit, alleging conspiracy, drugs, arms through Minna Airport. Ari Ben-Menashe claiming Israel and CIA used First Western Airline for arms transport.
These are persistent allegations pointing to Mena, Arkansas as a potential hub for these activities, and Brennicke's testimony about flying arms to Panama, cocaine back.
Chilling stuff. Let's circle back to Roy Cohn one more time. His ties to Studio 54, using drug info for political leverage. Hamilton Jordan.
That's the allegation, weaponizing personal information. And he represented top mob guys, Salerno, Galante.
No question about his mob ties. And his relationship with Donald Trump, Roger Stone, shows his lasting influence.
And his earlier links to Mo Delitz, Lansky's guy, connects back to the origins of these networks.
Okay, so now we bring Jeffrey Epstein into focus. Volume 2 of the sources starts detailing his rise, early career, connections to intelligence, these networks.
His relationship with Leslie Wexner, the limited brand founder, is key. Epstein had a big role in Wexner's empire.
And Ghislaine Maxwell, obviously crucial. Epstein's time at Bear Stearns, SEC, looking into insider trading.
Gives us a glimpse of his early financial activities and alleged connections to Douglas Lease, who was tied to Norinco, the Chinese arms firm, and Khashoggi again.
His relationship with Stephen Hoffenberg, Tower Financial, more complex financial dealings early on.
Seems so. And sharing office space with the Goulettis family at the Helmsley Hotel.
And their lawyer, Alan Tesler, was connected to Wexner's The Limited.
Another link. And Bear Stearns white labeling Forexter, that trading platform. Epstein might have been involved. Suggests he understood complex finance early.
What about his connections to other big names? Max Fisher in Detroit, involved with the Wexner Foundation.
Yes, linking back to Wexner. A. Alfred Taubman, retail and real estate mogul, connected to Wexner too.
Taubman's involvement with Sotheby's, Herbert Pugh Winokur Jr., who had ties to Penn Central, David Murdoch, Franklin Credit Union.
It shows these overlapping boards and business ventures among the elite. Carl Lindner Jr., owner of the Ocean Reef Club, allegations of drug smuggling there. Another connection to potential illicit activity within these wealthy circles. Leslie Wexner himself, the foundation focusing on Jewish leadership.
Stanley Hillard Jr. dealing with Israeli heads of state. Rabbi Maurice Corson, co-founder of the Wexner Foundation.
Shows a network with significant reach both domestically and internationally, focusing on influence and leadership development.
Charles Liedman's work on religious extremism. Wexner's huge donations to Harvard, the Wexner Israel Fellowship at Harvard Kennedy School.
Cultivating influence in academia. Steven Spielberg linked to Lew Wasserman of MCA, who had his own mob ties. Lester Crown's family, alleged mob associations. These connections seem pervasive in certain circles.
Internationally, the Rothschilds trying to regain dominance, partnering with James Goldsmith, Robert Maxwell, Sir Gordon White.
A global power play. And Goldsmith had prior ties to Epstein, apparently.
Robert Maxwell trying to get into New York media, courted by Edgar Bronfman, Lawrence Tisch, who were in the megagroup with Wexner.
Shows how these powerful figures interacted, courted each other. Maxwell's failed bid for the Jerusalem Post with Charles Bronfman, another overlap.
Ghislaine Maxwell's background, social options, JFK Jr., Prince Andrew, her own businesses like Magellan, sets the stage for her role with Epstein.
Absolutely. She moved in those circles from early on.
Okay, Epstein and the Clintons. How does that connection start? Robert Rubin. From Maxwell's bank to Treasury Secretary.
Seems to be a key initial link, yeah. And Epstein's recorded visits to the Clinton White House. Numerous visits. That's significant.
The whole Vince Foster death controversy.
Yeah.
Those wild allegations about codes, Mossad. Does that connect contextually?
It adds to the intense atmosphere and the questions around security and access during that time, especially given Epstein's later access. Then James Rioty meeting Clinton about China trade. Mark Middleton getting hired by Rioty's company.
Smells like influence peddling.
That's certainly what the sources imply. Charlie Try's fundraising for the DNC. Foreign money, straw donors. Johnny Chung getting access for Chinese businessmen. Liu Chaoying, daughter of a Chinese general.
Serious national security concerns there.
Absolutely. John Huang, DNC fundraiser, ties to Indonesian Rioty's Chinese interests. Bernard Schwartz, Laurel Space, exporting satellite tech to China after big donations. Ron Brown, Dynamic Energy Resources, tied to Huang and the Riotys.
It paints a picture of potential foreign influence reaching deep into U.S. politics via campaign finance.
And Boris Luchansky, Russian businessman, alleged mob ties, Israeli passport, represented by Ted Shackley's friend, connected to Maxwell's global coalition of criminals and Nordex.
Wow. And Forrester to Rothschild, her relationship with Epstein, recommending him to Victoria's Secret, her prior family connection to Rosenstiel.
More elite connections reinforcing Epstein's access and legitimacy in certain circles.
Finally, Epstein, the fashion industry, and the exploitation allegations. Jean-Luc Brunel, close to Epstein and Maxwell, his troubled modeling agency.
Central to those horrific allegations. And other fashion names in his contacts, Dickinson, Campbell, Royer, allegations against Klim, which she denied.
A disturbing side of his network. And allegedly using the Victoria's Secret connection, Wexner's company, to lure young women.
That's the claim. Accounts from Mauricia Chartouni, Virginia Roberts Driffer, being recruited by Maxwell with promises.
Melanie Walker, offered a VS job by Epstein, becomes his science advisor close to Prince Andrew.
Shows the different ways people became entangled. Sources suggest a hierarchy, different tiers of victims, and the Prince Andrew connection, allegedly facilitated by Ghislaine Maxwell. Epstein helping Sarah Ferguson financially.
Just incredible reach and influence.
Then, after the presidency, Bill Clinton's association with Epstein seems to increase, just as the Clinton Foundation is launching.
Suggesting Epstein might have helped shape Clinton's post-presidency path, given his connections and financial background.
It raises that question. And the flight logs? Clinton, Doug Band, Ira Magaziner, Bruce Lindsay, others involved in the foundation setup, all flying on Epstein's private plane frequently.
Between 2002, 2003, specific trips with Secret Service.
Yeah, multiple flights documented, including that trip to Asia, meeting leaders in Singapore, Brunei, all on Epstein's plane.
Ron Burkle also interacting with Clinton. Talk about a pardon for Michael Milken.
Another intersecting financial power player.
So wrapping this up, what we've seen is just this incredibly complex, often disturbing web.
Yeah, intelligence, organized crime, elite finance, politics, all tangled together across decades, driven by power, influence, money, sometimes very illicit money.
It really forces you to look differently at history, doesn't it? And maybe at current events, too. How might these kinds of hidden networks still be operating today?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it? What does this history tell you, the listener, about how power really works, about the information you get, versus what might be happening beneath the surface?
It's definitely a lot to think about. Understanding these past connections gives us, hopefully, a sharper lens for looking at the world now.
Couldn't agree more. Critical thinking is key.
Well, thank you for helping us navigate all that. And a huge thank you to you, our listener, for bringing these sources to us. It's been quite the deep dive. We really encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning.